Hello, and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guest is Desi-Rae, who runs a YouTube channel called Thinking Out Loud, or just Thinking Out Loud, or Desi-Rae Thinking. That's her Twitter handle. She does those kind of videos where she takes a topic that she's interested in, and then she proceeds to reason her way through things. And so I have her on my channel to reason her way through things. I just kind of throw questions at her, and I kind of get to watch her make sense of what's going on. We talk a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, her position, and her thoughts on that. And we also talk about the ways in which revolutionary behavior and the theories behind revolutionary behavior might not match up to her values and her views on how society should function and how society should become better than it already is. She's a wonderful thinker to bask in the presence in. So I'm going to get out of the way and allow us to proceed into a conversation with Desi-Rae. I think in a certain respect, the lockdown has worked insofar as it has worked because we were already acculturated to online living to a certain degree. I think that's kind of mediated some of the desperation, perhaps just taken the edge off in a way, or given us some amount of wiggle room to maintain social connection. But I think one reading of the riots that have been happening, the protests, let's say, that turned into riots, but let's just say that the mass movement under the aegis of Black Lives Matter, I think a strong portion of that was just people need to be social. People need to get out into the streets and meet up, and that was one way where they could be valid in doing that. What's your take on like the unrest that has been rolling across the country?
I definitely agree with what you just said. I think that the situation right after, like around March, when everyone was like, oh, people are dying. Then people went home, started to become unemployed. I think that it was a perfect concoction of like the perfect situation to create social unrest. And part of me thinks it could have been a bit strategic. I don't know. It's hard to really tell in hindsight whether or not politicians were just like reacting based off of how dangerous they thought COVID-19 was. I always said like use the word China, but I was like,
did you?
That's not my style.
Okay. You thought of it though.
I did because like I was one of those people who like I started quarantining myself really early. Like so in my head it's from China, like that's where it came from, like the place, but like the PC part of it. I don't know if politicians were just reacting or they were thinking, oh, let's like screw Trump and like blame everything on him after, in terms of not the deaths but the making a situation where people were at home and, as you said, not really socializing. And then with the media frenzy, first of all, just with COVID-19, that was the most horrible thing at first. Like, that's how the media was treating it. And then it shifted to, like, the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter stuff. But it's really important to remember, like, the media makes every single thing that is going on sound like the worst possible thing ever to ever happen, ever at that moment in time. And that's how they were treating COVID-19 at first, before the Black Lives Matter thing came. So yeah, I'm just agreeing with what you said, that I think for people being stuck at home, not going to school anymore, not going to work, that definitely created an environment right for people then wanting to go out into the streets and derive meaning in their life.
Yeah. What was your reaction when that first started happening? What was like kind of the way you were making sense of it?
Well, when the George Floyd story first broke out, I remember tweeting, people are crazy when they're acting in groups and very emotional. So the energy shifted. Like there was like a shift in like energy online, in like the cultural commentary, once the George Floyd thing happened. So I just remember thinking, oh no. I didn't realize how far it would go, but I mean, it affected me too. Like, I think everyone who saw the initial video before, like, getting all the context, like with George Floyd and the police and the policeman on his neck, it triggers something in you. And then, like, when it's done, within the context of the U.S. narrative about police brutality and black men, which I don't agree with, but we know that that's there. I saw that and I was like, oh, people are going to go insane. And then they did, even a bit more than I thought. So, yeah.
Did you feel like you could be an influence on that? Or like to make sense of it for people? Do you think that there's a possibility of restraining that? Or was it just tinder in the silo kind of thing? It was just like, this is going to erupt and there's no stopping it. Did you feel like compelled to even try to slow things down or tamper things?
Yes, I would say I did. However, in my small circle, like I didn't think I had I don't think I am, but I heavyweight, in cultural commentary, but I do think I have some influence. And so, I think I do generally try to, tell people to be more rational, or what my favorite thing really to say is that this is really complex. This is a complex situation, because I feel like people simplify things way too much. So yes, but not to a high degree.
Yeah.
In terms of influencing people.
Yeah. I just wonder if, cause I was really, kind of triggered, not by I understood the video and the context of the video would be shifting, and I understood there would be a reaction, but when the reaction hit and you see all this behavior happening in the streets, some very interesting, very strange behavior, but it brought me back to where I started, which was at the Evergreen State College, and it was the same exact thing. It was the same language, the same emotional urgency going on. So I was really triggered myself. I'm like, oh no, it's happening. It's happening all over the world now.
Yeah.
Like the entire world is turning into that. And so I kind of had, I felt like it was time to like figure out how to put my voice out there in the right way to give people some sort of tools to actually understand that this is going to be used by interests. Like in my Evergreen story, the college students, they acted out, but it was the administration that got their way. It was the administration that came in, implemented all this training, and then all these rules on speech, and then just reorganized the institution around the nominally, the nominal moral urgency of the students. And I know, and that's what I see. That's what I'm actually worried about. Isn't the protest? It's that all the people that are going to take advantage of the protest to implement their trainings, their version of reality and stuff. What do you think is, like, watching it, what are the big things that stand out for you, or the big issues that you find most interesting about the phenomena of the protests over the last 3 months or 4 months? What aspect?
How illogical it all is. And, I was thinking that what you were just saying about higher, like, interest using people's emotional response in order to implement changes that they want to see. I definitely foresee that also, and we're kind of already seeing that. But I would say that's the biggest thing. I had a tweet recently, I don't know if you saw, about the 99.99% of police interactions end okay. And I kind of had that idea in my head already, but it was the first time I put those numbers in, and I was actually kind of sad. Like I genuinely felt sad when I realized how, I'm not saying all police are good or anything, but how starkly different that is from the emotional frenzy that the media sort of whips up. Like there are, and I'm not saying there couldn't be, it's possible that there are pockets in the US where some people might be being targeted. I don't know. I'm just trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. But it's, as an average person, no matter your skin color, like being in the US, you are not gonna die. Like
when you
maybe
step out your
there's
door.
gonna be some abuse of power or something. Even that probably not as much as people say it is, because a lot of times people don't get called on. Like I was even looking at those stats and how many of those police interactions occur because someone called the police. It's not like the police just showed up. I think it was like about half or something. So like they're doing their jobs for like all their citizens. They're like protecting citizens from each other. And it's just the whole narrative is untrue in terms of people needing to fear the police. And if you look at the specific incident with George Floyd, I'm not even sure that the entire culture should be commenting on it when they don't understand what it's like to be a police, what it's like to be like dealing with a possibly violent criminal. Like it's coming from a place of naivety almost, even though you could also say it's goodwill, to want to like make sure someone isn't being treated badly. And I think most people can get behind that. But like after the George Floyd incident came out, you have all these details come out about how he was like on drugs. And then I actually watched the video and you saw how much he was kind of like resisting. Like I didn't want to go in the car at first. But then at the same time, like the guy had his knee on his neck for 9 minutes for a really long time. So that also seemed unnecessary. Yet the way the story was presented in the first place was very far from like what actually happened. So I would say that is the biggest thing to me, is just how illogical people are. So I guess there are two things I mentioned to summarize. First of all, just like using one incident, one example being George Floyd, even though the Jacob Blake, the other stuff came out afterward, other stories came out afterwards, and then trying to generalize that to like all police interactions in general with the public or with black men in particular. Like that's just, it's not true. Like, and then also in terms of this telling of the actual incident, like they leave out a lot of details or people don't wait to find out the details. So there are two levels of like, it's just like people's emotions are much more important than like what actually happened, what actually is happening. And I found that very sad. Like, because that means we're not, as a society, at understanding how emotional we are, and then kind of like reeling that in order to be reasonable, not unemotional, not cold, not uncaring about people's lives, but like there has to be reason. And like it seems to not be there, and that's like very perturbing.
Yeah, there's a conditioned response. Again, going back to my studies in college unrest and watching different, if you look at whenever there's a protest at a college, it comes down to an event. Like there was one little thing that sparked it. Swastika of poop on the wall, or somebody draws the wrong word, the N word, on a toilet somewhere. There's this little tiny event that it doesn't necessarily tie to the reaction to that event. It really does seem like there's a conditioning to be activists, or there's kind of an expectation that this is the proper response. It doesn't matter. They're not, and they even say this once you listen to enough footage of the protests and stuff. It's like, they're using that one little incident, but what they're really fighting against is 400 years of oppression or 100 years of oppression, right? They're really out there trying to change history. Like, so I think that somehow that becomes their context.
I agree with what you're saying, and but it's not for you, but for like what you're saying they're believing. Like, we're not in 400 years of oppression. Like, that is not happening. It is not happening. No matter how like unfair some things may be or personal prejudices people may have, like people in the United States are not being oppressed, or black people have not been being oppressed for 400 years. I do not believe that is true. I also don't think only black people have been oppressed. And like I hate the inherent, in my opinion, selfishness of a lot of the like Black narratives, because it's like always just focused on this one group. And like it's okay, I think, for like one group to, you know, focus on their own history, but when you have, I always say this, like at a national level, like a country does not just exist for one group of people. Like I think you have to, you know, consider everyone. And yeah, I also wanted to sort of respond to something you said in terms of people being conditioned. People cannot think for themselves. So I'm talking to people and they're starting to pick up on, you know, this Black Lives Matter stuff. And it's like, you're just hearing people parrot activist thoughts that have been put out into the thought sphere. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you just keep hearing the same ideology sort of propagated itself over time, people are not thinking for themselves. They're kind of just like copying this like meme, like activist meme, you know, and like the incident that happened that roused up a whole bunch of emotions, is used to say, oh, this is something I should pay attention to. And I guess it like activates the need to, well, a couple things. I think there's a genuine need to eliminate what is perceived as like wrongdoing in the moment. And then there's also the need to feel, maybe they're the same need together. There's a need to feel as if you are doing that, like you are good.
Yeah.
So like the emotional incident is used to activate those feelings, but then those feelings aren't attached to your own reasoning about like what happened. Like you don't go and like think about the details and like, you know, understand that, you know, like if you're in a highly emotional state, maybe you're not reasoning properly, like understanding that bias. And so instead you attach that emotion to whatever someone comes, in this case Black Lives Matter, hands to you. They're like, oh, you feel these things when you see this horrible thing happen, even though you don't fully understand the situation. Here's what's happening. This is what you should do about it. Like, that's not thinking for yourself. So I think people are being, you know, manipulated.
Okay. I'm going to push against that, because how do you know that you're not just regurgitating rational thought? How do you know that you're thinking for yourself? Like, what's the positive content of thinking for yourself? How do you know when you're doing that work?
I say that I know when I'm doing that work because I take the time to dig into the arguments. So if someone says, I mean, just this thing I just looked up the other day, the same tweet I mentioned, I went and I did it at the first time I heard about Black Lives Matter. I did that. I went to their website, I read their thing, I thought about it. And then like recently I went and I looked at the statistics and I thought about it, because people make a claim. One claim is the Black people have been oppressed for 400 years. Black men are being hunted by police. People aren't safe. Another example would be like police need to be defunded, or so. When someone makes a claim, I'm saying that people don't look into that claim, and I'm saying that when in my thinking for myself, look into that claim and decide. Okay. Like I evaluate the claim. Do I think it's true or not? What these people are saying.
Okay.
But that's what I would call thinking for myself.
So one step then is to encase whatever is presented to you with doubt. You're like, I'm going to doubt this. I'm going to test this somehow. I'm going to go and I'm going to look at the claim, see if there's anything tied to that claim. And then I can, with that particular claim. But when you're constructing an argument against, let's say, an ideology that's created from your perception, you see a lot of people not thinking, they're regurgitating these different lines. How do you engage with somebody who has a tapestry of claims? Like, where do you go from there?
You know, I am not sure, because I'm in the middle of this like super long conversation with someone that I've known for a long time. And we just have different worldviews. And I'm like, so this person like sent some videos to me on like white privilege. And I actually sat and I watched it and I like responded to every single point. And my points of view did not change. And I don't think they've actually gone through all the things that I've sent them, so maybe they haven't done that. But I do think it's possible that even if they were to, they would just come back with like a response that's like from their view of the world. Now, some of those things, I think I've seen this happen. I don't think I do it, but it's possible that I do it. Is where like I will make a response that from based off of a claim that they made. Say, for example, this person said that this isn't the exact words, but they were basically making the argument that like statistics and the math that's used to debunk theories of, say, like systematic racism are only tools of like white supremacy. So it's like they're basically calling like logic, tools of white supremacy and like only proposed by white people. And so I was like, that's discrediting a lot of non-white people who like are also like use this thing that doesn't belong, that being logic and like reason and science, that does not belong to white people. And they kind of just like didn't respond to that. So that's what I'm saying. Maybe I do that, but I do see people have evidence put in their faces, or like I guess a logical response, and then they just like ignore it.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to respond to the original question, if someone is in a frame of mind, and I'm saying, how do you respond to that? Because they already have their set of claims. I'm saying that I'm not quite sure if it's possible, because like when you're locked into an ideology, sometimes the evidence can be put in front of your face and you just don't respond to it. So I'm not really sure.
Okay, well, let's reframe it this way then. At what point did you decide that logic, reason, doubt, skepticism was the correct way to interact with knowledge? Like, where does that come from? Why is that your value?
I guess that's from my schooling, if I think about it. It's like way before coming to the US or anything. Like I did science, like, so it's... Why did you pay attention to science? Why do you think that attracted to you in school? Because you could go through school and not pick that up too. Like, why did you? That's even before like college level or something, or even high school. Like you learn about logic, and like you can. I don't know. Like the thing that comes into my mind is that my brother had these like flashcard thingies that talked about space, and I used to read them all the time. Like that's the first, like some of the first instances of science in my head. They used to talk about how like the stars form. Like I can't remember learning about like what a red dwarf was, like the stars, and those are some of my first memories of anything scientific. That's why that's coming into my head.
Yeah.
That really to answer. I don't know when was the first,
Sorry to put you on the spot. I want to understand the psychology of people who are rational. I think that's important, because I think that when we are interacting with people in a different frame of mind, they just have it could be that they kind of have a different psychology, or they did have different experiences, or they just put things together kind of differently. But I do like you just evoking the image in my head of you as a little girl, like interacting with the stars. It's like that was your creation myth. Like this is how the world is built. Like there's these gases and they come together, and there's these
not exactly, because I also grew up in a Christian family, and like Jamaica is where I'm from, like it's super religious. So like I also had that, and I actually was like pretty religious when I was younger. Like I used to read the Bible, and like I cared about morality. I wanted to be good. And those things didn't contradict in my head. They actually don't still really, even though I'm not religious. I wouldn't call myself religious anymore. And that's magical thinking. Like religion is magical thinking, I think. Yeah. Because I can't see a God or whatever anywhere. So
But your
Wow,
belief in the
this is
good
so
is a place that could be very similar to somebody who is, let's say, and I don't mean this derogatorily, just to understand what we're talking about, somebody who's heavily into social justice, is really guided or compelled by the desire to be good, to do good, and to cause the world to become good. And we can question their methods, but I think that you, like you just said right now, that you really wanted to be good. Maybe you gave that up with religion.
No, I didn't give that up. No,
Okay, so you still want to be good.
I still feel that way. But I was about to say, like, as it comes to what you just said, I think if you really, really want to be good and do good, you go a bit further. Like, I think that you don't just, you're like, okay, if we really care about Black lives, what about, like, statistics with the fatherlessness stuff? Like, I think that's way more important than any other thing. And this is not unique to Black people, but just because, you know, they mean society focus on Black lives in general. Or if you're worried about people dying, what about all the people who die from criminals because police are afraid to police because of what, you know, social justice activists do? So I don't know. I am skeptical of people. It's like a surface level wanting to be good, because I think if you just look a bit further at the actual effects of the things that you are proposing, then you would change your mind. And this is a separate topic, but I used to be more like into the environment. Like, I remember I watched this movie called Home or something when I was in my first year in college, and I was like kind of traumatized about how like the earth is being treated like horribly. And I remember like telling my roommate about it. And she was like kind of looking at me like she didn't really agree with me, but I was like super into this documentary about how the earth is dying and we need to fix it. Yeah. And I think about my transition. Like, I'm not like that anymore. Like, I still care about the earth. Like, I still think people should be better to the environment. I think like the way people treat the environment is kind of a reflection of themselves. But I don't think that I need to mandate. I no longer think that like we need to mandate, I don't know, that companies stop producing X, Y, and Z because everything is gonna, if we don't do it, the earth is we're gonna die soon. Humanity won't survive. And I think part of the reason, two reasons I can think of for that, is because even though I still have that desire, I think, like I still want people to be good to the environment, I recognize that people's emotions, in this case, we're not talking about the Black Lives Matter stuff anymore, but the environment, about wanting to care, are used by others, like say politicians, to implement certain policies that might not have the effect that people want. I think a classic example, I kind of learned about this recently, is like what's happening in California. In terms of blackouts and stuff, and people pushing for alternative forms of energy, to the point where like the system doesn't even need to be like functioning well anymore because of the new changes that they've put into place. I don't think I'm the best person to explain this, but from what I understand, like there are different energy sources and people want renewable sources. So they turn off the more traditional ones and try to rely on renewable sources, but those aren't consistent. So they have to bring in power from other states, and then sometimes that doesn't work out, and so you get blackouts. And so the point I'm making is that because people push so much for certain environmental changes, policies, because they care so much about the environment, then they ignore the other effects. Like if you're having to bring in power from states that are still using these energy sources that you don't like, then what was the point in even doing that? So it's like if the people's motivations are more important than like what actually happens. That was one thing, and then the other thing was I also just don't like telling people what to do, because I realize how that can go awry very quickly. Yeah. I think I got my point.
Yeah, no, I think where you're heading us is that you kind of have like a libertarian kind of outlook then at this point in time.
Yeah, but it's not just libertarian, but it's also like practicality. Because like what are the actual effects of what you're trying to do in when you say you're being good? So I would say there's a libertarian thing too. But I don't know if people truly care. I think they kind of want to care, and then they stop there. because I really think if you look a bit further, you wouldn't continue thinking what you think. Maybe they just don't know, like, maybe they just like don't know to go look up stats or something, or like look up research. Like that's possible too. But I think if it's something so important, like if it's something you so much care about, then I think you would put a bit more effort. I kind of think that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there's that. There's a kind of like a cul-de-sac people get stuck in because they feel they get so overwhelmed by the desire to be right, or the same thing, just inverted, that these other people are bad, that they get locked into this frame of mind where they can't even go beyond the surface. They can't think of a Trump supporter as anything other than a Nazi, right? They're arrested in their ability to even go any further because they're existing on this emotional kind of treadmill almost, it seems like. Do you get stuck in those or have you, like earlier in life, like got stuck in like a caring circuit where?
Yeah, I would say what I just described in terms of me with my friend and watching that show could be an example of that, because I was just like so caught up in like we're hurting the earth and stuff like that. So
and what gradually got you to move your position on that? Like, what were the kind of the ways that you
learning more, which is what I'm saying. Like I think people don't do, like learning more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think so.
What do you think is the trick to get people to move away from being certain that they're right to being curious about how they're wrong, or how to be right, more right?
I
guess this kind of philosophy of education stuff, but
no, it's great. I can only kind of go off of me and like how I understand myself psychologically, and I would say that I've been slowly becoming less of a perfectionist. And I think that's because I have less of a need to like be perfect in like my thinking. And I think that has to do with how you're taught to view, I don't know, like yourself, like maybe when you're growing up, because if you have to perform at certain standards, then it's like you can't give any leeway. And I know this is like sounds very personal, but I think it's somehow related to people's inability to like let themselves be wrong, because if you have to be right all the time, maybe in order to impress other people, for example, then your brain can't like let go enough to say I'm safe, even if like I'm safe enough to like. You don't actually, but I think like this is like the thoughts people would have. Yeah. Look stupid, or not another. I want a moral version of that, like be seen as like socially bad.
Yeah.
So they have to be like comfortable with that within themselves in order to, think, oh, I might be wrong and it's okay, or someone else might be wrong and it's okay, versus someone else is wrong, they're the devil, let's get rid of them, like let's like fix their mind into like what it needs to be, instead of like having a dialogue. So I think that like rigidity like comes from like more like personal stuff, something like that.
I think you're onto something, because there are elements within what I'm going to call woke dogma, or the woke ideology, that state that if you're not on the side of fighting against oppression, if you're not actively in every moment fighting against oppression, you are complicit in oppression. It sets up this state, this psychological state within its adherents, that you have to be constantly agreeing. You have to constantly be going in the direction that causes people to not be able to question, because to question is to possibly be a part of the evil system, right? So they're precipitating the conditions of a bunch of thoughtless behavior with a couple of people up front, or maybe it's just guided by memes in the end. Maybe it doesn't even need a leader because it's stripped down to such an extent.
Yeah, I definitely think that these movements, tap into what you would call this like thoughtless caring almost. I think that's a good way to put it. It's like thoughtless caring. It's like all the like caring and wanting to like, make people not suffer and not hurt, but like with no thought behind, no comprehensive thought behind it.
Okay.
Because, there's like, people do give you like reasons for why you should, support, say, Black Lives Matter, for example, or critical race, whatever. But then you don't go a bit further.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you really want to tackle in your next season of content creation? What are some of the things that?
Yeah. I'm still doing this Gulag Archipelago series I've been working on. Which is a review of the Gulag Archipelago in Russia, so like communist Russia from 1970 to 1956. And I'm like a third of the way through, so I still have 2/3 of the way to go. And it's very long, but I'm still doing that, and I'm still
What are you learning from that book? What are some of the lessons that you're deriving from it?
Some of the lessons are how much resentment is responsible for people wanting to take away other people's property, or just like Marxist ideology. Another thing is how that very famous line, but it's really true, that good and evil is in the heart of every man, or woman. So I think that that's true. A lot of people can be complicit in a system that's harming others in their society, and it seems to be like the average person can get caught up in it. Another thing is how much what's happening currently parallels, what happened in, say, Russia, and from what I understand, other Marxist revolutions. And also how this is just the beginning. Like what's kind of happening now, like with the US, is just the beginning. And also an example of like where things can go, because it seems like it's just like these horrible thoughts about one group in society being privileged, and so you need to take away from them. I think that's the same kind of idea that we're seeing with, like, say, those bias sensitivity trainings that they're doing in terms of like calling all white people bad, etc. It's the same thing that happened, for example, in Russia, but except it was the bourgeoisie and the people with property. Like there are a lot of parallels. Another one is, the one thing that was really interesting was, so there are the kulaks, who are those the property owners, right? And then there are the peasants,
the farmers,
and these revolutions claim to, this revolution, the Marxist revolution in Russia by the Bolsheviks, it claimed to be for the peasants, but then sometimes when the peasants were like, we're not into this, like we're gonna actually like fight with the supposed kulaks who are oppressing us, then they basically told that they didn't know what they were thinking, like they couldn't think for themselves, the people in charge. So it's like they said that they were oppressing themselves, or like joining with the oppressors, and they were like self-hating and stuff like that. So it's like very similar like ideas you hear when someone from, I don't know, you could say like the Black community or any minority group really, when they're like the walk away movement, for example, they would just be told that they can't think for themselves because they're not like seeing their oppressors clearly. So it's the same thing that was seen. You get what I'm saying? You look at other countries. It's same thing that was seen. That's just one parallel. Oh, and then another thing, I don't know if I already said this, but just how far it can go, because like it ended up in death camps, like labor camps, and people, I think, basically being treated like slaves, even though for some reason nobody really talks about it like that, but it is kind of the same thing that happened. And it's literally from people proclaiming that they want to have like equality and like help peasants who weren't being treated well. So like you can have this like super idealistic, we're trying to help you, and then it ends up with people being exploited. Oh, and another parallel is the hypocrisy of it, which is, like all these anti-racists are basically just racist people. And like for the communist revolution and the Gulag archipelago, they're saying that they're trying to stop workers being exploited, and then they just exploit people's labor. Like that's like it just did exactly what they said they were against. So like lots of parallels. It's very, very educational, and also important to remember that this is just one example of like what happens with Marxist thought. And I do see Black Lives Matter as kind of like a Marxist thought, but with races instead of class groups.
Let's break that down then. What are similarities? What's being swapped out? If the equation's the same, what is the equation? What's being swapped out?
So for the communist revolution, there are the land and property owners. Those are like the bourgeoisie, and then there's the proletariat, the peasants, the workers. And the Bolshevik Revolution is basically like you are being exploited by this capitalist class, and we're going to overthrow it. It has to be a revolution specifically, and help you. So there's that, and then there's also the fact that there's resentment between these two classes. So there is at the beginning at least. Oh, I forgot to mention something else. Oh. So there's resentment between the two classes, and I would say that the bourgeoisie right now would represent white people, which is it's so horrible. It's a horrible reduction, but it's the same thing actually with what happened with Russia, because there's a point where they're talking about how a lot of the people who became the bourgeoisie, they came from the working class, and then it's like they were smart or they worked hard, etc.
Yeah.
And I think you see a lot of this, not necessarily just with white, but with this notion of privilege, where you have people who they become privileged once they just don't agree. So they might have actually had characteristics of the group that's supposedly being oppressed, but then if they don't agree with this notion of, in this case, white people being super bad, then they're just told that they're privileged. And I think that's a similar thing. But the thing that I forgot to mention was how rigid the ideology was. So something that happened with the gulags was that there are different levels of communism. So like there were people who were more socialist, and then there are people who are like more hardcore communists. And the people who were the most hardcore were actually treated the worst. Because they couldn't think for themselves at all. They had to like be exactly on the party line. And I bring this up as similar to what happens today, because a lot of people who are on the left, like if they don't agree with like the radical left, then they're treated just as badly as like people who are much farther away, like on the right. And so like the purity of the ideology is also something that's seen. I hope that kind of helped.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. You said that, so there's the dominant group and then the undominant group, or the exploited group, and then another group comes in. The revolutionaries are like another group, and they take the dynamics of the high class, the low class, let's say, and they say, we are going to reverse this, right? It seems to be the case.
We're going to make it equal.
Okay, we're going to make it equal.
That's what they
It
say,
seems
right?
that they are overlooking the concept of upward mobility. It seems like in a more passive system or a more capitalist system, as long as you have certain characteristics or act according to the system, you can actually move yourself up. You don't have to destroy the system. You just put in a bunch of work. You open up a shop. You do sound business sense, right? You use the tools of capitalism in order to put yourself where you want. It seems like the revolutionaries are overlooking that there's actually porousness between upper class and lower class, at least within certain versions of America. I think it's still possible. I know that you can look at it and say that there's a lot of disparity. I still think we have a lot of upward mobility, and maybe the solution would be to allow more mobility for people to gain wealth and to move up the class. But it seems like the revolutionary thinks of it as a system that is rigid because they themselves are rigid, and they want to smash it to make it equal. But that smashing isn't actually a solution. It's a destruction. It's not constructive. They're not giving the proles the capability to, raise capital, create value. They're like, no, we're going to create the value for you by taking it from somebody else. Is that kind of...
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a very apt description of what happens, and ties into the whole idea of resentment, like to take versus to build. And I would also say I think people don't understand, like, I think that inequality, that like big disparity is a result of like more wealth being created. So like people look at the United States and say, oh, there is so much inequality, but there is like the base is so much higher. And like I feel like maybe there's a way where I personally don't want this, but there are rich people who don't like having as much as they have. Like I do think that happens, and they want to like give some away. Like you want to reduce that inequality, but I don't think that the system that creates the wealth for everyone is gonna work without like that disparity occurring. Because in order for people to be able to like achieve, like they're gonna achieve differently. They're gonna like be able to have the freedom to do different things, and you're gonna have more room to like move around. So I think that it's a part of raising the base of material wealth for people. It's like you're gonna get that level of like inequality. That's what I see.
Do you consider yourself? I guess you're an independent businesswoman. Then you're an entrepreneur. But that's fair to say?
I don't like that term.
Really?
I think other people would probably call me that. I just don't feel like I like make enough to do that. But it's all very relative. Like compared to some people in the world, I'm doing like absolutely wonderful. So. Yeah.
Well, I bring that up because
I work for myself. Like I make money, like, through like things that I do for myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
And
I
bring
with
that
companies, but yeah.
As a contractor, stuff like that.
Yeah, like stuff like that. I mean, like I do JTOL too, but I don't focus enough on it. And like my artwork, like I get paid for that. Yeah. But I think it's, So I'm definitely used to like myself, working for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. That's kind of like I'm trying to contextualize. Maybe you have these values because they work for you, or maybe you want this kind of world because that's the world that you interact with. Maybe you see a path of success for you down the kind of more liberal free market kind of road, and that's why you would rather not have some sort of centralized authority or a revolutionary mindset to topple Jeff Bezos and give you your 10 years of Amazon Prime for free.
Yes and no. So I do agree with what you just said, that I do see like a path of success for myself. However, I've never ever thought that it was okay to like take things from other people.
Oh.
So like I don't think that has to really do with like where I see my success level going in life. Like I don't know, like my brain, like I think it's wrong to want to like take things from people. Like I guess if it's ill-gained, like if someone else stole it from someone else, it should be returned. But I don't think people voluntarily giving their money over to others to buy what they want is ill-gained. And then some people will argue that, well, people are being exploited in the process of someone, like running a company. But I also don't see that, because I see it as a voluntary thing that you would go and work with a company. Like, I don't think that jobs, like, I know what it's like for jobs to not exist. Like, maybe that has to do with it too, like where I'm coming from. I don't think that people are like, oh, other people jobs, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I don't.
Are you talking in the context of Jamaica? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess I am talking about it in the context of Jamaica. So I don't see like job creators as exploiting people, which I think that's a very common mindset in the United States. Um, so I guess what I'm saying is, I like when I first came to the US, I was doing minimum wage. Definitely, I would just be considered poor as far as I'm concerned, like in the United States. And I think I've I've never felt like it's like I have the right to go and take something from like people who have more money than me. So I don't know exactly where that's from. It might be maybe the Christian thing, but I don't think it necessarily has to do with like what I think I can do for myself.
Yeah.
I just think it's wrong to do that. Like
Okay.
I think it's unethical.
That's fine. What do you think about taxing though? Then.
Oh, well, I don't like taxes, but I think
Okay, we got that on the record.
I don't like taxes, but I do think that, like, I think that taxes provide, like, we live in a society that provides things to us. So I do think that taxes go for some good uses. And even if there weren't taxes the way we see them now, if you wanted to live in a civilized society with certain benefits, you would have to be giving something to that. I don't know. I don't know if that answers it. That's wrong. Like, I guess I'm saying that I'm libertarian, but I'm not like impractical about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about resentment? Where do you think that comes from in the reading that you've been doing? What do you think is the quality of resentment, or maybe in your life? Like, have you been tempted to have resentment, and how did you figure out that you didn't want to be involved in that? What do you think the psychology of that is?
Okay, well, I think I can answer it I think the best way to answer it is like from a personal level, but also more like, say like with the book, like more from my reading, as you say.
We can do the personal if you want.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I think that if you see someone, like I've been jealous of other people. I wouldn't say I feel resentment per se very often, but I could see like leading to resentment if I didn't recognize my feelings of jealousy as like a call for something that I desire and I want, and so I should go and do that. Like I should go and like take action to like fulfill my own desires. And so I think maybe resentment is people not believing in themselves, or not thinking that they can do what they see, have other people having. But I also don't think that everyone should want the same thing. So why I'm bringing that up is, like, if you want to be really successful, there's a lot you have to sacrifice for that. Like, I might not want that kind of sacrifice. So, like, I also think that sometimes people want things and then they don't want, like, to do what it takes to get there. And, like, don't sometimes also recognize what it takes to get there. Like, they think that it didn't require hard work, or sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time I think it does, require hard work. Or, like, even I think if someone inherits like wealth, for example, like it still takes skill and competence to manage stuff. Like I think a lot of times people see people being well off, and I have to specify materially, because like just because people have other things doesn't mean they're happy. And they don't actually understand like what it took to get that. So I don't know if that helped, but I think resentment on a personal level comes from not recognizing your own desires and then like believing in yourself to act on it. And I also think it can be difficult to actually recognize your own desires. So what I mean by that is, like, I think that you can feel resentment because you're like looking at something that you think is like what you want, but you don't actually know what you want. I actually think that's really, really common, because you have to be like kind of in tune with yourself, which I think takes practice.
That really resonates, because I can see how the preconditions of massive resentment are through a certain narrative that you are the poor people, you are the disenfranchised. If you are sold a bill of goods that society is after you, right? Literally through violence or economically through the system. If you can be sold that you are just a cog in the machine, that precipitates resentment on a massive scale. That's where you could have a revolution if you convince enough people that they are powerless. Then they'll do anything to get that power. Instead of, well, they will take the shortcut to power, which is, I guess, just a redistribution. Just like you're going to go there, you're going to take all the wealth, you're going to chop off Jeff Bezos's head. Again, it's Bezos because he pops up over and over again. But if they can rob you of your agency, if they can rob you of your sense of wealth, then they don't need to teach you the values to create wealth. They just put you in the position to take wealth, right? Again, that kind of precipitates the revolutionary behavior that I'm seeing in the streets right now in America, where people are walking down just acting like they don't care about anybody. They're acting in the name of caring, but they're trampling over common decency. They're trampling over civility. They're trampling over property because they have a higher goal, but they're not actually pursuing that higher goal. They're actually pushing everybody into an impossible situation of defending yourself and being the bad guy, or actually follow them along and no longer have your own agency. It seems like that is the case with like kind of like the philosophy involved in the communist revolution and in certain strains of what we're seeing right now. There's a loss of personal agency, and with that loss comes the loss of personal responsibility, all the way down into how you treat your fellow man, let alone how you build a good life for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I definitely think that these people who are not treating other people well in their revolutionary acts see other people as tools in their march to fix things. Like they're seen as like almost disposable because the idea is worth it. So they can like disrespect them, like their property rights. I consider bodily injury like a violation of property rights, but also like the people's stores, for example, like looting them or burning them. And if I tie that back into what you just said about people feeling like they don't have agency over themselves because the system is out to get them, then I think once you believe in like the system having the ultimate power and like the person not having power, then I kind of think that maybe ties into seeing as a person who you're going to violate their property rights as like not being important because the system, which is now your ideology, is more important than them.
Yeah. On this level of the conversation, it seems like it's entering into some sort of theology or some sort of religious conception of what it is to be, like the fundamental questions. What is a human being? What is a society? And then how do you create a good life? Like just those three matrix of values. Like if you really want to get critical about that, it seems like this ideology, both in communism and certain strains of what's happening now in the streets and, wokeness in general, has a conception of the world that doesn't have human beings in it, or it's missing a soul. I want to say like just the concept of the soul, like whether or not you believe in it, it doesn't even have a conception of a human being as valuable, is intrinsically valuable. The only value is in the system.
Or the idea, or the ideology. Yeah, I think that the individual doesn't matter. And like I think you can tie that back into the purity of the ideology, because like individuals individuate, so they like kind of break away from like what's like, like you can have like a cluster, but if you have if you have a line that's like the party line, like say like the Communist Party line, or like the Black Lives Matter ideology, like an individual can say, okay, I kind of agree with that, but like this doesn't really line up for me. So like I'm gonna like my data point is gonna like move a little bit, and another person's gonna be, and like that can't happen with like ideologies like
these totalitarian ideologies.
Right.
Okay.
So
why not? Why do you think that
it's connected to that? Why not?
Why is it? How does it get stuck in that purity spiral?
Well, maybe that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the rigidity and like being perfect, maybe.
Because that self-worth is only found in your belief system. It's not, yeah, okay, yeah. I see this like a puzzle piece to put together.
And this idea of like the basic questions of life about humanity and stuff. I do agree with the idea that these totalitarian systems kind of, well, first of all, they can't really exist alongside religion, a separate religion. And like, of course, I do think any ideology, so also religion, can become totalitarian. But for example, I think that nowadays, because a lot of people are not religious, they kind of have these ideologies, like say Black Lives Matter, fill that space for them of like what's the meaning in their life, how they're going to make the world better. I think you could argue that wanting to be good, I don't know if better is the right word, but an established outlet for that was religion. And now it's like being filled by these totalitarian ideologies. And I also want to point out that in terms of the communism in Russia, one of the first things they did was try to get religion to be an arm of the state, because it was almost like a countermeasure to the Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia.
Well, cool. Do you want to say goodbye to the audience?
Yes. Hi, thank you for watching. And you can find me at youtube.com/justthinkingoutloud. Just type in Just Thinking Out Loud in the YouTube search bar. And then you can also find me on Twitter at Desi-Rae Thinking. I don't know if I can plug a donation request here.
Yeah, sure, totally.
You can also donate to what I'm doing at justthinkingoutloud.tv/donate. I'd really appreciate that. And thanks for, watching and listening. I think we talked about some really complex, deep stuff. Looking forward to seeing what people have to say, for sure.
Yeah, I think they're going to jive with you, but you never know. They'll be the random jerk. As you well know.
Yes, I know that.
I'm going to end the recording now. What are you up to? Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.